We're recording.
Hey. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. You're close that door.
Close some.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Last week, I think. Oh, that new one. Last week, we talked a little bit about where Pastor left off in terms of forgiveness, and we went into. We talked about, we reviewed the issue of the Native American and being thrown in the water, and I think we came to the conclusion that forgiveness was essential to moving on. You cannot hold the baggage of forgiveness and at the same time continue to, well, you can seek enlightenment, but the extent to which you partake of it is limited by you, in a sense, and by your lack of forgiveness. So forgiveness is essential. Forgiveness keeps you in prison. Forgiveness keeps us limited. And forgiveness is not, we talked about forgiveness and how it helps the other person. But first of all, forgiveness has to help us. And we talked about this issue of selfishness in a sense, but it's I didn't want to use the word again, but you know, for lack of a better word, it's selfishness of self, knowing that until I do this for myself, I have no impact on anybody else. And so it is a selfishness in a sense. Forgiveness is about freeing me. Because what we said was, when someone does us a disservice or harm or hurts a feeling or whatever, that, good morning, that we can forgive them. We can genuinely forgive them. But that doesn't necessarily free them unless they accept that forgiveness. I mean, you can tell me, you can do me, you can stab me in the back. Yeah, that's my back. And you can say, and I can say, I really forgive you. I forgive you. But until you free yourself, it doesn't free you, but it does free me. So that's why I say that forgiveness starts with the individual, whether you're on the receiving end or the giving end. It's really up to the individual to make that choice.
Question.
Yes.
If I don't forgive, then that is indicative of resentment. And if I don't accept your forgiveness, that's also resentment.
Mm-hmm.
And both of those are stages of anger and bondage. And as long as I'm resenting, I can't move forward. I'm stuck. So and this is the thing that dawned on me as you were speaking. If you're stuck in unforgiveness, then you become a target for everything that's dark about unforgiveness. And as long as you remain in that state of unforgiveness, you continue to have these, what we call ups and downs, highs and lows. And I think that the reason there are highs and lows is not so we can be free from the lows, but so that we will be reminded that there's something that needs to be dealt with. Because a high can also be torture. If you know the low is coming. You know, it's like every time I feel like things are settling out, the bottom falls out. So now, when things seem to be going well, you hold your breath. Oh my God, when the other shoe go drop. You see what I'm talking about? Yeah. So that in itself can also be torture. So we have to free ourselves to the extent that regardless of how things flow, we make sure that we remain in a state of forgiveness continuously, so we don't get stuck.
And that's why I said there really is a really, not selfish in the way that we usually think of selfish, but there is a selfish base to being in that state of forgiveness. Does that make sense does that resonate from what Pastor just said? If I know that I'm going to be stuck, and I'm going to continue to draw that kind of energy to me by being in an unforgiving, by being unforgiven or being in an unforgiving state, it's in my best interest not to do that. But at the same time, it's in my best interest not to do that. It's in the best interest of everybody else who comes in contact with me, because if I'm a forgiving person. And I'm not talking about somebody that, somebody who's the doormat. That has nothing to do with it. Because I can choose not to be the doormat once I've forgiven someone too. Someone else can seem to think that, wow, you just let yourself be a doormat. Well, you know what? We've got to not let other people define how we feel about that. We choose. And as the Native American had to choose when he was in this water, which is symbolic of spirit, we have a continual choice about how we choose to respond. And that's what it's all about. That's what free will is all about. The opportunity to choose to be like Elohim. That's what free will is all about.
Barbara, I want to say something right quick.
Yeah.
When you were just saying just now that it does not mean that someone is a doormat, forgiveness is more akin to someone not holding contention between themselves and another person. So no, it does not have anything to do with to being a doormat at all. It has to do with your heart and your feelings towards that person. So not necessarily actions. You still can be easily be a doormat and not have forgiven someone. So just wanted that part to be clear.
Thank you. And one other thing, and what I was trying to do also, Sheldon, was come from the perspective of how someone else looking at you and how you respond to circumstances and to people can think that you're being a doormat when that's not even in the picture at all. What you're doing is doing what your father or your mother does. Forgive. How others choose to view that, you don't have to be defined by that. But you're right. There are other people who literally through unforgiveness, seemingly become that mat that every negative spirit seems to want to wipe its feet on.
Forgiveness gives you such a sense of contentment until what other people feel don't concern you at all. It does not matter what they feel about you. Now there are people who will use you as a doormat, but that's only because you allow it. You make that choice. And I think I talked about the meaning being, I seen you amongst wolves and sheep. Did we talk about that?
What?
Amongst wolves and sheep, amongst wolves. I seen you a sheep amongst wolves.
Sheldon, is that you or me? We talked about that at some point in time. Did we talk about that?
He rises and sits but harms us a door.
We talked about that sometime in the
And
past.
that's the doormat thing. Like, well, I think I don't know whether I talked about you or not, but when he says, "I'm sitting here as sheep in the midst of wolves," that in itself talks about you being in a place of danger. The other thing is, even though you're there, it says that be wise as serpent but harmless as doves. So if you're in the midst of wolves, the wisdom that you acquire is to know how to stay away from the danger. The serpent coils himself, puts himself in the coil, puts his head in the middle of the coil to protect it. But the serpent does not want to have a confrontation. The serpent slithers away if it's given opportunity to. It has confrontation in self-defense, but it doesn't want that confrontation. So what he's talking about is, if you sense danger, if you know the danger is there, stay away from it. Just refrain from walking in that direction. If you know that there are people who are constantly desiring to inflict pain or hurt on you, why continuously put yourself, in the position for that to happen? And the harmless as a dove speaks to the idea of dove living in places of harmony. A dove will not nest for very long in a place where there's a lot of tension, a lot of noise. If a dove is there, sense that there is peace and there's calmness there. So that's the whole concept of that, being harmless, wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove, which also plays into the idea of you not becoming a doormat simply because you want somebody to feel sorry for you. And there are a lot of people who do that. Who put themselves in those positions to get somebody to feel sorry for them. Like, they're always the victim. Always the victim. And see, the idea of being a victim automatically puts you in a position of inferiority.
Well, that's interesting that you use that word victim, because what's the relationship then of unforgiveness and victimization? Is there a relationship? Are you not a victim in a sense when you're unforgiving?
I think victim is more of how you perceive yourself. Because when we talk about the whole idea of bullying at school and stuff, right? I prefer the term target as opposed to victim, because target can move itself out of the way. Victim is someone, it says to me, has a connotation of being helpless in the situation that makes you the victim, being hopeless for you to handle. That's why I say that about a victim. So I think people but remain victims by choice. If you know you're a victim, do something about it.
And I also see victimization as unforgiveness as can be a form of victimization too. I guess is what I'm saying.
Okay.
And
what's your victim of? If you're
of choosing to keep myself in bondage by not releasing
so
myself and or the other person.
Okay. You're victim of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems to me a victim is a person who has decided to succumb to something.
Yeah.
So, which would be the same thing with it in that way, I guess, parallel to the unforgiveness. While we're talking about unforgiveness, how does that relate to oneself as far as choosing to be a victim?
I see it as a direct relationship. When I choose to be unforgiving, I make a choice not to forgive. I am choosing, as I said, to stay down in the ditch with the other person that I'm trying to keep down by not letting them go. But I'm choosing to stay in bondage by holding the other person bondage by not letting them go. So, in a sense, I see them as interconnected.
An example, real life example. I was doing some counseling with someone who had been raped, and when we got to the place of forgiveness, it was very difficult, of course, but when she did forgive the one who raped her, she was able to sleep at night. She did not have visions of the incident. She did not have visions of the person. She was totally free from that. So from that, I see how unforgiveness keeps you attached to the moment. And true forgiveness separates that gives you not a sense, it actually separates you from that moment, from that energy that seems to plague you all the time.
And the other thing it does is that it screens everything that happens to you. As long as you're attached to that, everything is screened through that. You, as a matter of fact, you don't live in the moments,
Right.
by moment, because you're still attached to that specific time. When the Messiah was on the cross and said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do," why wasn't something else said? Why forgive them, for they know not what they do? It's because forgiveness is such a powerful tool that we have, and yet we choose to, and sometimes we choose to use it unwisely.
I think out of this whole, all of these verses that we have been looking at and will be looking at until we get to man, the central thing is forgiveness. Everything hinges on it. Nothing else matters without that, because nothing else is brought into effect without that. It's like forgiveness puts you in a shell and is impregnable, and the only one who can penetrate that shell is you, by virtue of the nature of forgiveness.
Yes, because unforgiveness is automatically keeping you stagnant, in your growth, and it's locking you into a position where you cannot ascend higher. And it works counterintuitively to you realizing who you are and representing your connections with everyone else. Because even if you do see and notice the connections with yourself, you're still not recognizing yourself or getting upset or down about a certain aspect of yourself. So there's really no way around like moving forward without forgiving.
Mm-hmm. So if there's anyone, not just here, but everywhere, that's harboring unforgiveness, the message is to free yourself.
Yes.
Free yourself.
What does that say about the term, "You're some of the most forgiving people on the face of the earth"? What does that say about that?
And who says we're some of the most forgiving people on the face of the earth? Do we say that?
No. When I say we're talking about African Americans.
Yeah, I know.
And we're not just the ones who say that. There are people all over the world who say, "I don't see how you do it. How do you just act like this didn't happen?" And it's not acting like it didn't happen, it's recognizing that it did, but it's understanding that if you don't move beyond it, it continues to happen in the emotional way as opposed to in the physical way. And to me, the emotional is deeper than the physical. It's more dangerous than the physical. The scars are deeper.
Well, I think that one example of how we've been able to do that is that we don't equate things in the physical. We talked, this hits on some very specific things we talked about last week. One of which was the young man the young teenager who killed another teenager, that Evelyn brought up last time. And we were talking about, it's okay to feel that. It's okay to feel that. But you gotta let it flow through you and transform the energy of it. Meaning, it was a lot easier to get beyond that than some things in the past years ago. It's a lot easier once we know what it is we're here for. What's our purpose? And our purpose is, yeah, we feel the weight of that, but there's so many people who can't get past that. But if we are aware and we know what our purpose is, then we've got to get beyond that and say, okay, now what's behind that? What is the spiritual consequence? And I think that being the most forgiving people has opened up our awareness to other spiritual things that we can influence and receive than in the past. Because in the past we always looked at physical stuff and we gauged our progress by that physical manifestation. Well, that's all gone now. We can't gauge anything by physically what manifests, because now we know that the spirit is what's real. And so even if we don't see it with our own eyes, we got to know that we know that we know that we are making a difference. That what we talked about in putting things in the macro before, that's what we do. That's what we do to change things. And even though that one person, and I'm putting this because Elvin's sitting right there, even though that one kind of thing we talked about a lot was sort of weighing on us, by the time we left, I mean, we were lighter because we understood our purpose and we understood what it was we were supposed to be doing. And we understand that that one particular issue is just an example of a larger issue. And if we don't deal with that one in terms of the spiritual underpinning, it doesn't affect more than that, just one. But if we deal with the spiritual reasoning why something is happening, it not only affects that one, but everybody in other people in like or similar situations. And so that's the difference. We can look at the stock market and how it crashed for Americans. But you know, until we dealt with the issue of manna and who's your God and all of that, it would have just, we would have stayed, our focus would have stayed on that physical thing and this egocentric country here. But when we took it and looked at the spiritual picture underneath it, the spiritual essence of it, then we were able that dealt with markets everywhere. And so that's what we got to keep in mind. It's not all about just us now. It's about us and mankind.
So slavery was allowed to happen not for the manifestation of victims, but for the production of saviors.
Yes. And if some of them came through this quote unquote race, fine, but I believe that there are some others who saw, who also are saviors.
No question about that. I mean, in Garrison, there are a number of people who were not slaves. I'm talking about the system itself brought about saviors. And the salvation of it just began to manifest. Mm-hmm. After all of these years, all the hatred, all the anger had to bubble to the surface and be dealt with. And they're still making efforts to hang on. There's a greater effort now to enter a state of forgiveness than ever before.
And that's why when everybody, you know, it's so unfortunate what happened to a Trayvon Martin or who's the guy in Mississippi, the teenager who was lynched. It's so, that we aren't minimizing that, but what we're saying now is that at another level of awareness, we've got to see that, you know, you gotta feel it, and then you gotta transform it. We can't stay there. We can't stay there. If we believe, the question I asked last week related to, do we really believe that what we do now affects our future? Whatever that is, and whatever the future is. That fed into what we were talking about. And if we do believe that, then we ought to be out there looking for forgiveness under every rock. You need forgiveness? Done. You know what I'm saying? Because we know the impact of it. It is so powerful. It's so powerful. And so it helps us not just see the one kinds of things or the things that happen in our culture, but everywhere. I mean, even in the Ukraine, what's happening there now? I mean, not just the Ukraine. You hear about the Ukraine, but then there's still countries in Africa, still countries in India.
I think I'm putting that in the macro.
We talked about that.
IDF Deliverance did that. When you talk about the manifestation of material things, kind of sort of blinds us from the true nature of forgiveness or rising above what we have experienced. That in itself speaks to the very next verse. Lead us not to temptation, because the nuance of temptation from the Aramaic is materialism. And materialism is not just necessarily a car or a house. Materialism is also an attitude about each other, because it speaks to the material world as opposed to material objects.
So when one forgives, then, one is much less likely to yield to temptation.
Absolutely.
From a materialistic perspective. Because we know that has no influence in terms of being the important thing for us. So yeah, it flows.
And again, it's the every bit of it is an attitude. It's not forgiveness is not what you say as much as what you experience. Of course, verbalizing it helps because that's an expression in this material world. But internal experience has a greater impact because internal experience has a greater impact on your emotions. But and what you say may or may not. It depends on who you're saying it to. Mm-hmm. Because I can say something to you and you laugh it off. I can say it to someone else and they get angry. But that so it's hearing something depends on who the hearer is as well as who the speaker is. So.
But and the point is, we have to free ourselves, and then we can. We have to free ourselves because we can't take on the responsibility of someone else choosing to accept what we've given them. That's their choice. We choose to give it. That's what we choose to do. The question is, do they choose to receive it?
Like anything else. Okay, if you see someone and they are asking for money, and you are led to give it, you give it with no idea what they're going to do with it. It doesn't even matter. And that's the same thing with anything else. When the scripture talks about freely you receive, freely you give, it's not talking about material stuff only. It's talking about period, whatever it is. So how do you give freely? I think giving freely is not so much as handing as it is your nature being a giver, as opposed to give in. Because if you are a giver, then things naturally flow from you, unrestricted. And I think the more unrestricted things are as they flow from you, not only the greater impact they have, but the greater visibility they have, not in a natural visibility sense. Someone saying that something about you is different, that type of visibility. But if you are if there's an ebb and flow about what you believe, what you desire, then that's also visible, because then you get things like, well, no one really knows how to take you. You know, because today you one way, tomorrow you know, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the implications of doing that, what you were just speaking of, as far as also more so than just necessarily saying something, because it has to really take place in your heart anyway. But it brings you into a state of meditation or a state of prayer as well. It's almost you're a flow, or you are I was about to say, well, both you are more like the Creator, you're more like Jesus, as well as you are more of that Creator that you were intended to be as well. And so forgiveness in the heart, it frees you. It opens up a space, but it doesn't just open up a space for yourself, but it opens up a space automatically for others as well. So that opportunity, as others come in contact with you, etc., all of that is available to them. It changes them. If you walk in a room and you can feel different moods and things like that. And think about you walking into a room that is that you ever experienced that is actually pleasant. Well, when you have that unforgiveness, it's almost like that is made available to other people. They may not know what it is, but it all automatically can transform them in a sense. We've had experiences where we have been the person who has been transformed by someone in a positive way, and we have transformed others. So all of that is taking place in an opening way just by forgiving in your heart. Sorry, one last thing, and more on a traditional sense, I guess you would say. It in the language, it actually opens you up to be poured out with blessings, literally. It puts you in a mood that you're in the flow and anything can happen.
That's the whole sense of the verses we're discussing. It says, and when you pray, right? When you are in a meditative state, and if this is the case, and this is an attitude being discussed, then we are supposed to be in a continuous meditative state. And the meditative state of which I speak is not one where you're necessarily sitting around, physically meditating. I'm talking about your whole essence is in a meditative state constantly, and by virtue of being open for the flow of what is, as opposed to being closed or closing yourself to certain things. Because I believe wholeheartedly that if we're talking about shalom being the same word for meditation as it is for prayer, which means to be open in order to attract light, I believe that what he's actually saying to us is that you are supposed to be in that state of being on a continuous basis, because you don't know when the light or more light or enlightenment is going to flow in your direction, and you don't know necessarily when someone is going to be in your presence who needs that flow. So the continued meditative state also puts us in a place where it makes it easier for us to discuss things without necessarily having notes or doing a whole lot of research like we used to do. And I think one of the examples of that is when we were talking about a few moments ago, what was the word we were defining? It wasn't forgiveness, it was something else that we were talking about, and no one stopped to go to a definition. Victim. No one stopped to look in a dictionary, we just defined them. So that's what I'm talking about. When you're in a continuous state of meditation, those things just flow. And you don't look for the necessarily concrete understanding of something, but for the fluidity of the understanding itself.
And just like that word forgiveness, the usual way we usually think of it is, okay, you did wrong to me and I'll forgive you now. I'll forgive you this time. Well, forgiveness is not about just this time. Forgiveness doesn't set boundaries. Forgiveness lets go of judgment. It lets go of everything, so that it lets go of whether that person is white or black or whatever color, whether that person is female or male. It lets go of everything judgmental, and just allows that person who has the same pain that we have had in the past about something or someone or some experience. They're just there where we've been. And it's saying you're not just free. I'm free of the judgment I used to make about certain things. So forgiveness truly is wiping away all of the preconceived boundaries we put around something. I'll do this if you do this kind of stuff. It doesn't do that. So, and that's why I guess the thing that I'm hearing over and over is it is truly freeing. It is truly freeing. It releases us, and as Sheldon said, it creates a space in us. We don't have that baggage in us taking up space that wisdom could take up. When we let it go, that's space for something else that's spiritual, that we can take advantage of. So
It's, if it's releasing, canceling, letting it go. If a debt you owe is canceled, you don't expect to pay it, ever. So when that happens in terms of forgiveness, whether it be 5 minutes, 5 days, or 5 years, whatever happens between you and that person, you can never resort to that forgiveness at that time when you forgave them. It's one of the things that I use when I do marital counseling, is that when something goes awry and we're discussing it, and my question is, are you willing to forgive? And if the forgiveness, if the person says yes, then okay, regardless of what happens in the future, you can't make reference to this because it doesn't exist anymore.
but the people usually say, I'll forgive and won't forget.
Yes,
Which means,
right. You never forgave,
yeah.
because it doesn't exist anymore. If a debt is canceled, it doesn't exist anymore.
Even if the other person tries to bring it back up. And sometimes they will, because we're not all where we need to be in terms of awareness and enlightenment. I'm not even thinking about that. Don't, please, that's gone, that's done.
And regardless of how many times I've said that to people and they've accepted it, if we come back together again, here they go.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, we're not going there.
You're not gonna put me in
We're not
that,
going there. You
in
said
that bondage
you
again.
let it go. And there is a couple that I was counseling, and he insisted on bringing stuff up. I said, you know what, we done. When you get to the place where you understand or can accept the nature of forgiveness, we can talk, but we done. And now he got angry with me, he hasn't spoken to me since. But the point of the matter is, I explained what forgiveness is, you accepted that, now you want to badger her with it again? So, if we don't get badgered, if we are not revisited with what we have been forgiven for, then why would we revisit what we forgive other people of? It just doesn't make sense. And the difficulty with moving forward, I find, is with people, the closer you are to someone who hurt you, the more difficult it is to release it.
But once it's released, it's very powerful.
Yes,
Very
no question.
Truly released.
Yeah, it's almost like you can breathe again.
And for yourself or the person who refused to forgive, it is impossible. It hinders that particular relationship from repairing or from moving forward. So as far as my relationship is the Pastor Richard, if I couldn't forgive him as far as my relationship is to him and our closeness from my perspective, I am hindering that. So I'm the holdup within myself. I'm keeping that relationship at that locked at that particular low position.
So then, if when the Messiah was on the cross, it says, "Forgive them, for they know what they do," and we are created in the image of Elohim, and forgiveness is one of the aspects of the nature of Elohim. Then being like our Creator has nothing to do with location, but it has to do with what we do. And forgiveness is one of those things that if we do it, that's one way we show our likeness to Elohim, the Creator. Other comments? Anybody else? Any thoughts from last week of other stuff that we talked about a lot of stuff, but anything else? Forgiveness is powerful. Practice it until you do it.
It actually doesn't happen until you do it. And you can think it, but until you actually do it, you're only fooling yourself.
Okay, Pastor.
Okay.
Unless you got some other comments about forgiveness, you ready for the other?
I hope you have some more.
Hmm?
I'm messing with you. Yeah, I want to talk about
Temptation.
yeah, lead us not into temptation. So you move?
Well, we really don't need anyone up there.
Okay, yeah, Sheldon,
you know?
that's what I'm getting.
Sheldon is there.
Okay, when I read that, and lead us not into temptation, a lot of things open up. First of all, when we talk about the idea, lead us not into temptation. Is there anyone who has children in this room whose child came to you and said, Mama or Daddy, please don't lead me into temptation?
Yeah,
I mean, you see how weird that sounds?
very strange.
So, but it would make sense to say to the parent, help me to stay focused so I don't enter temptation. What am I saying? If we are saying, if our children don't say to us, Mom, don't lead me into temptation, why would we have to say to the Father, don't lead me into temptation? It just doesn't, that doesn't make sense to me. And of course, some translation says, do not allow us to enter into temptation. But the whole concept of entering carries different connotations depending on whether or not the word is used as a verb or a preposition. The word ta'alon is T-A-A-L-A-N is the word used in this particular verse for enter. And the root of it is al, A-L. And that root talks about entering, going into, but it also talks about intercourse. It has about 10 other words. And as a preposition, it can be to be, with, to, etc. Now, if we look at the words from the way they are written in the Aramaic, it's very, very difficult to just literally translate that unless you have tremendous familiarity with the language itself. Because when Jesus says to the disciples, stay awake lest ye enter, no, that you may not enter into temptation. That word may not enter into temptation. The only difference in that one and the one used for enter in the scripture we're discussing is the O. Is instead of spelling it T-A-A-L-A-N is T-A-A-L-O-N. And the differences are so subtle. So it was easy, I suppose, for them make that error in talking about not leading us into temptation or not letting us enter into temptation. Now, if it was true that the Father, we say, Father, don't let us enter into temptation. If that's literally translated that way, then what we are actually doing is giving up our free will. And we are saying, hold us back from temptation. But the essence of the concept is not to hold us back from temptation. The essence of the concept is to keep us so focused on the principles of the kingdom until we don't enter temptation. So it's about helping us stay focused, and it lends itself to the whole concept of being co-creators. Yeah. So it's a balance. It's like saying to a parent, help me to stay focused so that my grades don't slip or whatever. You understand what I'm saying? Does it make sense? Yeah. So either we are co-creators in that sense that we work together to avoid these situations, or we are not. Now, putting a pin in that, the whole concept of being a co-creator is something that's just thrown around without anybody thinking about it. Because if you are a co-creator, then that means that you help bring everything into existence that is. Does it not mean that? Mm-hmm. And if creation is continuous, then that means that you are continually creating something. So, having said that, that tells us that we are not necessarily equal to the Father in terms of creativity or created, but we are there with it in terms of creating. The other thing is that we have a tendency to say, to substitute rather in these verses the word God. God provide our daily bread. God does this, God does that. When there is no reference to Elohim or Allah in these verses at all, it is always the Father. It's a boom. So it is. So when we talk about, when we ask are going to keep us focused, so that we don't enter into temptation, what we are actually, one of the things we're actually asking is that our focus remain on the desire to be at beginning, because without that we are entering temptation. And with the understanding of temptation, was it Nishona? Nishona. N-I-S-Y-O-N-O, yeah. With that word meaning, having as one of the nuances of it, materialism. It's talking about the material world. Keep us focused so that we don't get engulfed by the material world or by materialism. When we say that, what we're saying is keep us focused. Focus where? On the spiritual. Because when we lose focus on the spiritual, it is at that point we become more focused on the material. You can't have it both ways. When Jesus talked about you can't serve two masters, that's what he's talking about. You have to be focused on one or the other. You cannot be split focused. You cannot. That's why there is one eye when we talk spiritually and two eyes when we talk materially, because we have a split vision. So this is not saying to us that we should not engage with materialism. It is saying that we should not be overly caught up in materialism. Materialism should not be our focus. And materialism is not just a house or a car. Materialism is also conceptual. Materialism consists of far more than the material objects. Materialism speaks to the entirety of the material world, whether it be manifested in the physical forms or our concepts as they pertain to this physical world. So what we are asking the Father to do is keep us focused. How do we keep focused? Sometimes we're focused by discipline. Discipline us to the point where we learn how to stay focused on the spiritual, as opposed to shifting our focus to the material. The other thing is that we are taught to focus on the material world, and one of the things that gets me about that is whether we are in school, at home, in church, doesn't matter where we are taught to focus on the material world, and we're taught that by virtue of learning. Well, you're going to grow up and you need to get a job to take care of yourself, and you need to do this, and you need to do that, you need to do this. And none of those things are we talking about telling them what they need to do spiritually. And none of those things are we saying, seek ye first the kingdom of God and righteousness, and all these things will be added. None of those places are we saying that. And even at the church we're talking about, well, if you want to be blessed, then you do this and you do that if you want to be blessed. And when we talk about being blessed, what are we talking about? When we talk about being blessed in religious settings, it's about the manifestation of material stuff, as opposed to a deeper insight into the material things that we're experiencing. As for example, earlier when Ramel made mention of the Northern Lights, what does that mean? When the Bible referenced Evelyn bringing up the homicide that was committed the week before last, I believe it was. What does that mean? These things, when we talk about staying focused on the spiritual, that's what we're looking for, because when we focus on the spiritual, we are actually focused on ourselves. Because we are spirit, are we not? We're focused on the principles that causes us to be who we are. Now, if we focus on what we see with our eyes, as opposed to seeking what we can see with our eye, we would never move beyond the material world in terms of our, not only our thoughts, but also our desires. So the attitude that's being developed through this whole concept of not entering, of not being overwhelmed, allowing ourselves to be overwhelmed by, or to be possessed by the desire for the material, is that it's incumbent upon each one of us to make sure that when we talk about the idea of being tempted, we understand that we're talking about the concept of seeking the material over the spiritual understanding. So the question would be, why did the homicide take place? Why did the lights appear? Now, if we look at it from a religious perspective, the homicide took place because it's just evil. The world is just evil. Is that not the answer? The next question would be then, why is the world evil? Because they took prayer out of school. Come on, give me a break. What happened before there were schools? You know, so give me a break. But that's the attitude, isn't it? So it seems like the efforts are in the material world to sustain the material world, to maintain the status in our lives, though based upon the responses we get, as opposed to saying there has to be some deeper meaning to this. And the whole Northern Lights thing, I intend to do some research in relationship to what the North means during the course of this week, because I know it has something to do with the influx of divine energy, based upon some previous studies that I've done concerning masonry, where the north side of the lodge is the dark side of the lodge, and no one sits there, which is totally against everything that they say they believe in terms of being the light. So if I want to know, if my desire is to know what the story behind everything that's manifested, then that's telling me that my desire is to understand the spiritual source of everything that is. Does that make sense? So are we getting clearer on this idea of not entering temptation, not being manipulated by temptation itself, because that's what it, by materialism itself, because that's what it does. But if I say if each one of you pledge $1,000, you're going to receive $10,000 before the end of the year. That's manipulation. That's material manipulation. But you'd be amazed at the number of people who would do that. I tell you that you take a $100 bill and you put it in the Bible between these two chapters, and you leave it there for 6 weeks. And at the end of that 6 weeks, you bring it and deposit it in the plate or whatever, and you're going to receive a blessing for that. There are people who believe that. To me, that's no different than snake handles. It's the same principle to me.
Like the one that got bit?
Yeah, well, I had to repent.
Or?
I mean, you play with the bull, you get the horn.
He played a long time, boy.
You play with the bull a long time. And but that's, you see how ridiculous that is? But the reason it is so ridiculous is because the reason people don't see it as being ridiculous is because of the source of it. The source of it is the church. But when you step back from it and you begin to ask questions about, okay, and this is how I've kept my focus for such a long time, is by virtue of asking myself, if the scriptures are spiritual, and it does say that my word is spirit, if that is true, then there has to be something more about these, and you'll be able to handle serpents and stuff. It has to mean something more than that. It has to be much deeper than that. But when you are literally a fool, you interpret it literally. And even worse than that is the worst translation on the face of the earth is considered the only translation, which is really crazy to me. And that is the reason we are running around talking about telling the Father not to lead us into temptation, while in James talks about even Elohim not being able to be tempted. So why would he tempt you? So we pick and choose what we want the scriptures to say. And based on the discussion that we had earlier on forgiveness, if you don't forgive, then you have relegated yourself to being totally influenced and manipulated by the material world. And the material world is not just things. It's also concept. It's also dark energy or unripe energy. Because it says, keep us focused so that we will not be manipulated by or be focused on temptations. Deliver us from evil.
So the temptation then can be external or internal, because set concepts are internal.
Yes.
The manifestation, the physical manifestation can be external, but it's everything. It reminds me of that, what we say from an Aramaic perspective, my inside is my outside is my inside. One is the other is the other.
Yes. And see, when you say, do not allow me to enter us to enter temple, who's the us? It's not that's the body, it's the spiritual. It's the spirit us, isn't it? Deliver us from evil. That's a very bad translation, deliver. Because deliver is not strong enough. Deliver, the word deliver does not give the depth of desire that the original word gives. The word deliver is talking about after I get entangled in it, get me out of it. Is that not the implication?
Free me.
Huh?
Free me.
Yeah, after I get entangled in it. But a better rendition, or a better translation, I should say, of that word would have been separate me from. In other words, set me apart from unrightness. That's what it's saying. It's talking about keep me focused so that I can be set apart from unrightness. So I can be set apart from evilness, as opposed to being delivered from evilness. So,
You know, I just looked up deliver, and if you look back at it, also, it has the meaning run as water, flow, meaning not to be stagnant and bottled up somewhere, but allowed to flow, as if it's saying, don't let me, don't let this thing bind me, but as the Spirit flows.
well, and we talked about that earlier, with unforgiveness, it renders you stagnant. And
Yeah.
so that all this flows together. What is the Sheldon?
Oh, I was just it just came out. I was agreeing with you and Miss Parker were talking.
Okay.
It just came out, huh?
Yeah. Just fill out your mouth. All right. But that in itself should tell us something more about how awful the translation is, and help us to begin to see that how vital the development or the acceptance of this stated attitude is to the course of this world. If our attitude is such that we remain in this state of being as is projected by these verses, some of which we have discussed and others that we will discuss, then that state of being, we don't have to remember the steps. We don't have to remember, give us this day our daily bread. We don't have to remember our Father which art in heaven. We don't have to remember that. If the concepts are accepted, if the concepts are heard by our ears and received in our heart, then the desire for that to be the attitude will begin to move us in that direction. But we can't go kicking and screaming, because if we're going to be moved in that direction, then there are going to be things that's going to confront us. There are going to be opportunities for us to revert to what we understood before, to what we accepted before, and that in itself creates an ebb and flow of what we accept or what we believe, and that in itself puts us in a position of making an attempt to serve two masters, and you can't do that. We have to make a choice between the two. I was trying to think of something that was flowing through my mind.
What are you thinking?
Okay.
As you were talking and reading, and I was reading it's a reminder, this prayer is totally not what we think it is. It's a reminder of going back to the beginning.
Yes.
That's what the whole prayer is about. It's a state of being, it's a reminder to us, a state of being, of beginningness. Even when it talks about in earth as it is in heaven, that's marrying those two concepts of upper and lower world type kinds of things. And it's talking about beginning and oneness. And it's reminding us that when we think about all of these things, when we think about having just what we need on a moment by moment basis to give to somebody else, not necessarily just food, but whatever the need is, it's an indication of just living and being in the now, which is the same as eternity in a sense.
And I also think it's interesting, well, it sounds like you want to write the attitude thing on that one page. It also struck me that it begins with not our Father. It begins with, this is the attitude, shalom, and it ends with, amen, which says that when you open up, then the amen says, let everything that I have understood about this come into being in my life or in our lives. Because again, it's not talking about me, it's talking about the whole of mankind. Which also says that when that is our desire, since the desire is the essence of our purity itself, then that makes it available to the whole of mankind. And that's one of the reasons the upheavals that Barbara referenced earlier are not surprising to me, because without upheavals, there can be no balance. And if we look at it, if we're taking up more with the material than we are spiritual, then we're out of balance. And we see what the results of imbalance is. I mean, if you want to see a great example of spiritual imbalance, then you have to look no further than the thing that we seemingly focus on, our economics. There's never been greater imbalance in the financial realm of this country, in the history of this country. The 1% versus everyone else. That's indicative of a spiritual imbalance. And it's funny that the smaller amount tilt the scales when it seems like the larger amount would. But in the other realm, if we can see that, what is it saying in this realm when we talk about the material, the imbalance there? It's saying that what we see as our source is being withdrawn from us. And our source is in the process of developing even more schemes to manipulate us so that we will desire to have what we see as our source in a greater manner. But if we look at it from the spiritual perspective, we begin to see that because of such an influx of light, mankind is being put in a position where he has to recognize that his source is not the economic system of this world, that his source is the one who created everything that is. Can you see that? So our objective is not so much to see a income imbalance or a financial imbalance as to see what it means. what it represents. And when we begin to understand what it represents, we may not necessarily have a solution. We don't need one. Only thing we need is a desire. Because with that desire, what happens? Enlightenment flows. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? So, there was something else on deliverance from evil. When it talks about separate me from evil, another way of looking at that is this. If you keep me focused, so I'm separate from unrightness, then that gives me an opportunity to transform the unrightness to rightness or the darkness into light. Because the idea of leading into temptation, if we are light and temptation is darkness, then the light can't be led into darkness. Because every time the light hits, there's no longer darkness. So light cannot be led into darkness. So it can't mean that. And then so we want to be separate in that maybe understanding that could be we want to step back, be kept far enough from it so we can see what needs to be done, so we can perceive what it is. And even if we don't know what needs to be done, is our desire that the unrightness become rightness. Because unrightness, in terms of fruit, in terms of the Aramaic, unrightness does not necessarily mean something that has not ripened on a tree yet. Unrightness simply means not fit to eat, which means that it can be sour, or it can be rotten, or it can be unright. So unrightness from the Aramaic perspective is indicative of all those states.
So it's not appropriate for this particular situation or experience at this moment, in a sense.
Yeah.
That
Right.
unrightness.
Jeremiah. The Lord said, Jeremiah, what do you see? I see ripe figs. I see figs, I see ripe figs, I see very ripe figs. And I see, as it is translated, unripe figs and very unripe figs. The translation should have been, I see ripe figs, very ripe figs, and I see sour and rotten figs. That's what the translation should have been. So that in itself says that unrightness, because it's the same word that's used, is talking about those things that are not fit for consumption. And those things that are not fit for consumption, when we grew up, the things that were not fit for consumption was not necessarily the stuff that was on the table. It was things that people said that was not fit for consumption. It was things that people did that were not fit for our consumption. You see the principle? And again, by virtue of translation, it shows us the depth of the understandings of the words that have been translated into concrete words in the English language. Because when we think about unrightness in the English language, we simply think about a fruit or a vegetable or something that is not ripened yet, as opposed to something not being fit for consumption. And it also means something that does not have any nutritional value. So, and that, I guess that's most of our food in this process. Any questions? Comments? And I take it you have clarity, and she said it all. That's right, amen. Amen. That's free as way of saying we done yet.
I think another way you could look at righteousness as well is what it implies. It implies that nothing in itself is bad. You say it's not ready for, like if you were to say it's not ready for consumption, it just means that it doesn't belong at that particular place at that time. But in itself, it's not bad.
Right.
So let's say if you did have the rotten fruit that we ourselves should not eat because it has no nutritional value. That fruit does, however, have nutritional value for the soil to provide nutrients to it in the state in which it is. So, that goes back to the entire temptation and evil thing as far as staying on the course to pursuing, not being sidetracked, getting entangled. All of it is, like we were saying before, tied together. To not avoid the things, but not get caught up in pursuing the things that are not right or shouldn't be consumed at that point. They serve purposes, other purposes, I should say.
I agree with everything you said, and to add to that, what you just said led to the idea of being deceived. That that is, well, it's not fit for consumption, so it's not fit for anything. That's a deception. You see? So staying focused on spiritual principles also keeps us from being deceived by materialism. Because there is a belief that without material things you can't survive, and that's why you need to focus on acquiring them. I believe that everything that's in the earth, everything that we are, and everything that we receive, regardless of how we receive it, is to be circulated, not accumulated. And that's conceptually as well as physically. The reason that there is such a disparity with incomes is because it's not being circulated, it's being accumulated. If you don't allow anger to flow through you, it will accumulate and it can kill you. If you don't allow what we perceive to be negative attitude or comments to flow, if you accumulate them rather than allow them to flow, then that can damage your health. So everything must be allowed rather to flow, as opposed to must be allowed to circulate, I should say, rather as opposed to us accumulating. And keep in mind, the word being used is circulate, because circulation has no beginning or end when things are allowed. If it's in a circle, it just continues. And the only time that the circle becomes a vicious circle or cycle is when we have a tendency to hold on to stuff, and we get stuck into an orbit of our own. You understand? Don't we say that? I'm stuck in a vicious cycle. We're stuck in the orbit of our own, as opposed to flowing with the whole of nature itself.
So, several things. A little while ago, you had mentioned about the entire thing with people in church and money and being manipulated. So we were talking about that as far as the pursuit is concerned. And basically what is happening in that situation is the people who are pursuing those things are just getting involved in temptation and they're pursuing, let's say, we just use this for example, which is true, monetary value. Not only are they pursuing the monetary value, but they're also being led by the one to stay off of course as far as pursuing the other things that they should be pursuing. So it's almost like they're made to be, because it's in the preacher's best interest, they're being made to yield to temptation. So going back to forgiveness, and as we talk about pursuit, accumulate, circulate, etc., when we, well, first of all, let me just go right quick and say a few things that forgiveness has to do with right quick before I tie it in. To placate or cancel, make an atonement, cleanse, disannul, be merciful, pardon, purge, reconcile. Now, when we talk about the pursuit and not being caught on to temptation, when we forgive, we are inviting ourselves back onto the proper pursuit or flow. And as well, we're saying that the person that we are forgiving, we want them back on that path of flow and the proper pursuit as well. Because you are, in forgiving them, acknowledging that, and it works both ways, that you and that person, that's your desire for the two of you to be on that proper pursuit. That is all.
10-4.
Even in talking about monetary things, we still talk about cash flow. No, I mean business talks about cash flows. So again, it's all about allowing everything to flow.
Yeah.
The question is, in what direction is it flowing? Is it flowing in a circle, or is it flowing in one direction at all? I mean, one direction period. And when it begins to flow in one direction, then everyone else behind the direction, in the opposite direction rather than it's flowing, begins to suffer. And that's the same thing that happens spiritually. You think about how the charismatic church began, the Azusa Street movement, and how things were flowing. But the moment that there was an attempt to merchandise, make it a merchandise as opposed to a spiritual flow or a spiritual gift, it was stifled. And then as a result of that, the ones who were pursuing it began to suffer and not even understood. They were not even understanding that they were suffering. And they were suffering from a spiritual drought, when at the same time they thought that they were at a spiritual trough. I'm done.
No, I was just thinking, the whole idea of flowing makes you think of blood and circulation. When do you have illness, disease, and problems? When there's blockage. Yeah. So, I mean, so it's, the design is for there to be flow, exchange. And within the concept of flow is the concept of, I suppose you could use that analogy, the passing of nutrients, the exchange of toxins, nutrients, etc. That's how you keep balance.
Right.
So the idea is to keep freely flowing healthy blood, and the rest will come with it, basically.
Then flow you die.
So I mean that can be a metaphor.
Yeah. Well, it is actually. I actually believe that everything in our lives are a metaphor. I do. Everything we encounter is a metaphor. In this realm. See, we've taken this whole idea of worldliness and transformed it into something that it was never intended to be. the whole idea of worldliness, you know, when we look at it from a religious perspective, it's all about people doing things that you don't like. That's what makes you worldly, isn't it? Are you being attracted to things that the religion says you shouldn't be attracted to? That's worldliness, but that's not the sense of what worldliness is. The sense of the scripture talks about worldliness, it is alluding to those things that attract our attention away from the light. And it's not so much worldliness as it is materialism or selfishness. All these things are parts of that. But we have listed these distractions that we call world. As a matter of fact, one of the most materialistic institutions on earth is the church. And you name an institution, a single institution on earth that's more wealthy than the Catholic Church. Not one single institution. So it's predicated on, you know, this material world. It's not rooted in the spiritual at all. It's rooted in this world. And if it's rooted in this world, what's it going to produce? Fruit of this world. So, and I don't think it's necessarily bad. I think it's the perception of it that determines whether or not it is. I think all of it is good, to tell you the truth. Because eventually you push you in the corner, and you got to come out of that corner. So, especially if you think. This guy said to me yesterday, I was speaking with him, concerning some things. He had gone last week to a great effect to surprise me, he and his wife. And I asked him who got the surprise, because I wasn't there. And we were talking about some things that were being discussed. And he was laughing about the difference between what he was accustomed to and how much he learned. And he said, you know what? You do know that there are a whole lot of pastors who don't like you. And I said, of course I do. And he went on to say, you know, they don't like you because you don't know what you're talking about. They don't like you because they don't know what they're talking about. And it just made sense. But, you know, if we deal with things on the basis of how other people perceive us, we never get anything done. It goes back to forgiveness. If I hold something against them because of how they feel about me, then nothing ever opens up for me to see beyond what I already see. And you know what else happens? You become blinded to what you have seen. It's no longer available to you. So I don't lay down at night or wake up in the morning thinking about who like me and who doesn't. But I do hold on to the belief that once you meet me, the jury's not out. Either you like me or you don't. There's no in between. So that's how I think that's how things should be in our lives. You know, either you stand for something or you don't. Either your desire is to be the essence of what you believe, or it isn't. It should not be wishy-washy. It should not be, well, I don't know about that. Especially with us, as long as we've been talking about this stuff. We ought to be at some place where we have some kind of foundation that brings us some kind of stability on this journey. Wouldn't you think? Because if there's no stability yet, when would it come? If there's not a foundation here, when would it be laid? Especially for those of us, you know, who've been engaged in this for the last 18 years, however many it's been. Because I read some of the stuff that I wrote 15, 20 years ago. Boy, if you were to read this stuff, you'd get it right there. But that's the difference in then and now.
just want to comment that, even though this verse ends, the verse 13 that says amen, the next verse starts again with forgiveness. So forgiveness is key to this oneness, this melding of both worlds into one.
Okay, I'm done. That's another comment, question. I want to share this with you before we leave, and I will hopefully have it printed next week. I was hearing, as Barbara walked in, that on March the 15th at the State Archives off of Park Lane Road, there will be a presentation about the history of the founder of Sims High School from which I graduated.
Of what?
Sims High School, the school from which I graduated. And the presentation will be by the people whose foreparents owned the plantation from which his parents came. And after that, there will be a luncheon, and then there's going to be an informal lunch with his family and some more of us who are going to discuss this over lunch. And then at 2 o'clock at the State Museum, there's going to be an exhibit that will go on display. And prior to that, there will be remarks given, comments made concerning the exhibit. And on Thursday night, I received an email asking me if I would be one of the commentators for that event. So I probably on the 15th won't be here. I'll be dealing with that. There was a gap that we were trying to fill in between the time that A. Sims was born and the time that he became the Principal Sims in 1928. And the phone call, I talked to somebody last night, and they said, well, I don't even know anything about that. Then it dawned on them, he graduated from Benedict in 1899. Because our thoughts have been that the watercolor paintings that we have of who we think the parents are, grandparents were, may actually be his parents. Because if he graduated, his parents died, well, the ones who we have, last one died, I think, in 1881, and he graduated from Benedict in 1899. So he had to be born prior to that. So, but it's an interesting history there. And and while what happened is that these people who parents were the owners of the plantation, did the research themselves, and it led them to Sims while they were searching for their identity. And why is it important? It's because Sims was the first accredited African American school in the state of South Carolina. Sims was the first school in the state of South Carolina, black or white, to have vocational programs as a part of his academic structure. There are a lot of other things that comes into play with that. So I'm just honored to be a part of it. So, and that's why I'll be on the 15th. And I've gotten watercolor paintings from prints rather from some things that was done. The originals would be on display, and they were done like in 1841. So, and the way they did the history was, they had been given through oral tradition. The stories had been told to each generation about the plantation, how and where it was, and they decided that the guy, he said to me, who this guy's a lawyer, but he teaches at UNC, he teaches public health law, and he says to me, we felt like if we didn't do this now, everything we got will end up on some table in the yard sale when we die. So, we want to give it to them as well. Which probably right. So I'm done. I want to tell you that. And if you're interested, let me know. Talk to y'all later.
Well, right quick, when you were saying talking about the Lord's Prayer was not meant for something to actually like just, I guess, keep saying, but something to live.
Yeah.
That for that to be of your essence more so.
Mm-hmm.
So upon the request of Janice, it's this quote about y'all aggravating her about the name of the video.
What?
After the every time we finish.
I didn't say anything about aggravation.
Not aggravation, but how y'all pick at her like, why can't she come up with the title?
I don't know who they are.
But I sent her this quote from my favorite philosopher. It says, "The fish trap exists because of the fish. Once you've forgotten the fish, you can forget the trap. The rabbit snare exists because of the rabbit. Once you've gotten the rabbit, you can forget the snare. Words exist because of meaning. Once you've gotten the meaning, you can forget the words. Where can I find a man who has forgotten words so I can talk with him?"
And? So there's the title.
Oh,
So you're telling her that Janice didn't get the meaning?
No, she's saying that's why she can't put it in words because she's forgotten the words. She has the meaning of what we actually talked about. How when everyone is like, what did we talk about last week?
hey,
What
you
did
one
we
word,
talk
right?
about last week?
Yeah, one word.
It's hard to encapsulate it in words.
Well, yeah, so why not ask the question, what do we need a title for?
Just one word.
Why don't we just do dates?
We need a keyword.
What's the title tell you? Let me go back and look at I go back and I look at my notes and really?
Sheldon, are you coming to Philly at the end of the month? I got to be in Philly 27, 28, 29, and 30.
You have to be in Philly 27, 28, 29, and 30.
Yeah.
I'm working on it now.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got to do a symposium. So.
Okay. Okay.
All right. We're just talking now.
Yep.